Okay. All right. I've landed the perfect job as a business consultant at Arthur Andersen, one of the leading consulting firms in the world at the time. I'm 22 and my life is lining up beautifully. I'm set to, my work visa is expiring, so I have to move to the Toronto, Canada office because Canada has a better shot at permanent residency for me. And so I end my apartment lease in Annandale, Virginia. I even have a big farewell party, and I pick out a stunning apartment in a high-rise building overlooking magnificent Lake Ontario. 2 weeks before my departure, Barry, one of the senior partners at the firm, calls me into his office. And I go racing in there because I want to learn all the final details about my travel. And I'm dreaming at this point about weekdays in Washington, D.C., and weekends in the lively, vibrant city of Toronto. But Barry looks uneasy. And he looks at me and he says, Sylvia, I'm so sorry to be the one to have to tell you this. The whole transfer has fallen through. We can't, in spite of what we thought, we cannot sponsor your US visa or your Canadian work visa either. And my heart is sinking because I've worked hard for this. I outperformed all of my peers and even won an unsung hero award that was typically reserved for higher level consultants. And now I have 15 days to remain in the country legally on my visa. And I find myself with no apartment, no job, no clear path forward. And as I'm sitting in Barry's office, something comes across my mind that I once heard spiritual guru Gary Zukov say on the Oprah Winfrey Show. He says, you must never use negative emotions to make an important decision in your life and expect to get a positive outcome. I mean, this is so profound to me. I repeat it in my head again. You must never use negative emotions to make an important decision in your life and expect to have a positive outcome. Well, I'll tell you that I took a deep breath and I didn't panic. I didn't lash out. And instead, I just remember saying, Barry, I don't understand why this is happening. This is a horrible turn of events. But I'm going to believe, I must believe that this is happening for a reason, even if it takes me a while to figure this out. And of course, he was stunned because he was bracing for my wrath. And I'll tell you that being calm in that moment, for me, was my turning point. Because I didn't spiral, I was able to think clearly. And so jumping into graduate school became my saving grace. And it bought me some additional time in the US. And while I was in school, I got certified as a life coach and began to build a practice. And I was able to find visa sponsorship. And all of those decisions led to my career that now allows me to travel around the world, sharing my messages wherever I can. Now, ladies, the reason I tell you this story is not because I had a plan, right? I didn't have a plan, but I worked to develop a mindset that helped me make space for that plan to emerge. And so the point of all of what we're going to talk about today is this reality, ladies, that, mindset won't stop life from throwing curveballs at us, right? That's our mindset alone doesn't stop the hardships of life, but it ensures that we show up in the best way possible, right? In the face of things that are uncontrollable to us. And so what I want to say to you is that mindset is going to matter a lot to all of us because each morning, ladies, as you wake up, right, and you step out into the world, you are met with an unspoken promise. It's a promise of change and uncertainty. And you embark on a daily journey through the metaphorical streets of your life where challenges await you at every corner. So this means every interaction, every experience you have is literally happening in the streets of your life. And so whether those experiences are there to test your patience, cloud your perspective, cause you discomfort, or even disrupt your plans, you still have to kind of find a way to navigate these streets every day, don't you? Yeah, and I think, for us as women, we often those streets for us are lined with with more than what feels fair for us to have to navigate, right? I mean, I know that so many of us are juggling things like dual career family dilemma, right? We're juggling gender bias. male-dominated spaces, the pressure to be assertive and likable, right? Many can relate to that. We're juggling pressures of perfection and the constant need to excel and so much more. Now, in spite of all of this, an important question that we should be asking ourselves, ladies, is how exactly are you navigating through the space, right? How are you managing all of it? How are you maneuvering through the streets of your life every day? So this means that separate and apart from your intellect and your skill set, the question is, what are you carrying in your emotional backpack to help you navigate your personal and professional spaces, right? Um, think about this. Every day when we wake up in the morning, we have an invisible backpack that we're carrying with us. And what we carry emotionally determines how we walk mentally. And so what I'd like to do in the remainder of the time we have is give you 4 tools, okay? And these 4 tools are rooted in emotional intelligence. And I believe that they are a must-have in your emotional backpack as you are navigating through the streets of your life every day, okay? And before I jump into those tools that I'm going to share with you, I want to get a sense of, when it comes to mindset, like what is that and why does it even matter? At the end of the day, ladies, your mindset is essentially the filter through which you process the world, right? So this means it determines what you focus on, right? How you interpret discomfort, and also whether you see challenges as a weight or a window, right? And it's really important to think about that. A solid mindset doesn't eliminate the hardships of life. I think we can all agree on that, right? But it transforms how you move through them. And so that is why we want to focus on mindset, because we're living in a world that's so uncertain, right? And ever changing and very blindsiding. Now, we shouldn't overlook thinking about why we falter sometimes, right? I mean, every single one of us, and myself included, sometimes, my mindset needs to be shifted, right? Why do we falter when it comes to mindset sometimes? And I think for me, one of the things is maybe we're just, over identifying with our past failures, right? But maybe you falter in your mindset because you're carrying with you stories that are no longer serving you. Or maybe you're fearing discomfort, right? Or maybe you're defaulting to like an emotional autopilot when it comes to your emotional triggers, or you could just be asking the wrong questions as you're navigating through challenges and difficulty. And so the goal here is not to never falter, right? We're not looking for perfection, but the goal is to become emotionally equipped to navigate and bounce back faster and be more resilient when we do face those challenges and setbacks. And so, as I promised you, the 4 tools I'm going to be sharing with you that I believe are important to have on your journey through developing a more resilient mindset, these 4 tools are really designed to help you answer 4 questions, right? Hey, how do I overcome imposter syndrome? How do I harness inner resilience? Right? We're living in very uncertain times, very shaky moments. We need resilience now more than ever. How do I use my emotions to work for me and not against me, especially in challenging moments? And the 4th tool I'm going to share with you is how do I navigate uncertainty with greater agility, essentially? And so here are the tools. We're going to look at the importance of embracing what I call empowering narratives, right? And we're going to look at the importance of something that I call enduring the draft. And some of these will be in the handout that Jamie mentioned. So don't, and I'll also give you the access to this PowerPoint presentation for those of you that aren't writing very quickly or just want to pay attention. Minding your monologue is a very important tool when it comes to harnessing our emotions productively. And then the final tool I'll share with you is what I call gateway questions. I talk about the fact that sometimes we falter in our mindsets because we're not asking the right questions of ourselves so we can clearly see what lies ahead. So we're going to look at that, but jumping right into the first one, imposter syndrome. Ladies, I believe that when it comes to your journey through life, the reason why I think women especially find themselves plagued with imposter syndrome more than maybe men will admit they do is because, think about this, when you're striving to do more and to become more in life, you're going to have moments where you question whether you're deserving of the place you find yourself, the opportunities that are in front of you, right? So imposter syndrome to me is something we should shouldn't be shying away from. Every time you're feeling a little bit like a fraud, like, do I deserve to be in this moment? I want you to think about the fact that you're growing, right? So imposter syndrome is something that's going to plague us all from time to time. You know, many of you are familiar with Dr. Maya Angelou, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the fact that she suffered from imposter syndrome. After every single one of her 11 best-selling books, I remembered her saying that, you know, she was just waiting for the shoe to drop. When are they going to find out that I'm not half as good of a writer as they think I am? And so if Maya Angelou can be plagued with imposter syndrome, then it's normal for all of us from time to time, as you're going for more, doing more, trying to become more, you're going to be plagued with this. Now, ladies, I think that one of the biggest culprits to keeping us wallowing in imposter syndrome, right? It's one thing to feel it, but we don't want to live in that moment for too long. One of the biggest culprits to keeping us rooted in imposter syndrome is the stories we are telling ourselves about what is happening around us. And I call this your narratives, right? And quick story here. So a good friend of mine, Christy is an amazing human being. So one day before the pandemic, she calls me and she's in a panic. And she says, Sylvia, I need you to meet me at a coffee shop in DC because I'm so stressed out. I have been asked to present to almost 300 women at a conference in Washington, D.C., and I want to back out of it. I don't think I can do this. I know I'm going to make a fool of myself on stage. My English isn't perfect. And Christy is just going on with her fears about this opportunity. And she says, I think you can knock some sense into me. So please, let's have some coffee so I can talk this through with you. And so I meet up with Christy, and she's telling me about how she got the opportunity. So Christy, as a background, by the way, she's from the Dominican Republic, but she grew up in the Bronx. So most of her English is fine, right? She lived in New York most of her life. And she says, Sylvia, you know, she has a women's journal that she was placing in different offices. You know, when you go to a doctor's office or a lawyer's office, sometimes you see these women's journals sitting there that you can kind of read and indulge in. Well, some of those journals come with sponsorship. And so Christy's little franchise business was to go around as many offices as she could and try to sell them on this business journal. And she gets doors slammed in her face constantly. But to me, what was remarkable about Christy's story is that for one entire year, she was driving from Washington, D.C. to Richmond, Virginia, every single day, round trip, to place her magazines in Richmond at the offices there because that was her territory. And Christy was able to place 300 magazines in a very short period of time. So these ladies wanted to find out about what her magic was. That's why they invited her to speak at this conference. But she's freaking out and panicking because her English is not the Queen's English and it's not perfect. And so as I listened to Christy and knowing how much of an amazing human being she was, I said, Christy, I hear you. I understand this is how you feel. But Christy, I said, I'm not buying this. You're telling a very expensive story. And you know, you could see her look back and she says, Sylvia, why? What do you mean expensive? And I said, Christy, think about everything it has cost you to hold on to this narrative that my English isn't perfect and I'm not going to be any good in front of any audience. I said, it's cost you the chance to teach your daughter Maya, her mother tongue, which is Spanish, because she said she was so tormented by her friends teasing her about her bad grammar all the time. She did not teach her daughter how to speak her mother tongue, which was important to her. And Maya is now 25 and speaks maybe a few words, that's it, of Spanish. So I said, it cost you the chance to teach Maya Spanish. It's about to cost you the chance to be in front of these women, sharing your story. And then I named two other costs to her. And she started to realize, like, wow, okay, I'm understanding what you mean when you say this is expensive. And so to each of you, I also want to pose that question because all of us, we have a story that we're carrying with us that is no longer serving us. And I call those expensive stories because even though it's a story that's familiar to you and you've held on to it, you and I know that maybe it's no longer serving you. But I think what is so powerful, ladies, if you can spend some time over the weekend thinking, do I have an expensive story? I want you to kind of go through a three-step process, okay? So on a blank sheet of paper later this weekend, I would like you to just draw three columns, okay? In the left column, you're going to write out just a summary. What is that current story you're telling yourself that you know is no longer serving you? Maybe you're trying to vie for a promotion or change companies or start a long-term relationship, and you're telling yourself a story that is clearly proving to be expensive. But the magic is this, ladies. I want you to consider focusing on the cost for a moment, right? So many of us, we're carrying these expensive stories around and they're familiar to us. It's like the devil you know, right? Versus the unknown. But if you spend time articulating on this piece of paper, what is the cost to me of continuing to hold on to this narrative? I guarantee you that you will be much more inspired to embrace a more empowering narrative, a new empowering story. So, example with Christy. Her expensive story was, my English isn't perfect. I'm going to make a fool of myself if I'm ever on stage sharing my story, right? And we know what it was costing her. And so what I invited Christy to do in her own words, not in my language, not in my words, I said, Christy, I want you to create a new narrative, right? So every time that old expensive story slithers into your head, which it's going to keep doing because you've had it with you for so many years, I said, I want you to counteract that story with a new narrative. So in Christy's own words, she said, every time I feel insecure about not having the perfect English, I'm going to stop and think to myself, I am primed for this moment. They chose me for a reason, and then they deserve to hear my story. And so every time that expensive story seeps in, Christy now shuts it down with her new empowering narrative. And I want to invite you all to think about that. This is really critical because our imposter syndrome so much is rooted in those stories we're telling ourselves about what we think we're capable of or what we're deserving of. Really, really important to think about that. Now, I was talking about Maya Angelou a moment ago. Um, Please ignore the little Afro puffs girl standing next to her. So this picture was taken about 24 years ago. And this is going to be highlighting the second strategy, the second tool that I think is a must-have in that emotional backpack for you. So this picture was, as I mentioned, taken about 24 years ago. I was waiting tables at B. Smith's restaurant in DC. I'm sure since we're all in this local area, many of you might have heard of her restaurant back in the day or even eaten there, right? And so I'm minding my business, waiting tables, my lunch section, when all of a sudden we hear that Dr. Maya Angelou is in the house. And she was catching the train from her house in Harlem down to her home in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And she stops in the cigar bar to have a martini and some red beans and rice, as you could probably see in the picture in the corner over there. And so I asked my friend who was bartending, I said, Candace, can you just find an opening? I just want to rush in and say how much I admire her, and I'll go back to my section and mind my business. And so Candace is, serving all the customers, and all of a sudden I see her running to me. And she says, Sylvia, come now, come and see her now. So I take my apron off, take this gold black vest I was wearing, threw that off, and I go running to the cigar bar. And I say, Dr. Angelo, so nice to meet you. I just want to let you know how much I admire your work, and you're just amazing. What an impact you have on the world. And she says, very nice to meet you, young lady, in that regal voice of hers. And I'm turning around to go back to my section, but in true Maya Angelou fashion, she wants to know more about me. And so she starts asking me what I wanted to do beyond waiting tables. And I told her I just started out as a life coach, and I'd co-authored a book way back then. And I wanted some advice from her on my career. And she says to me, do you have a business card? And I said, yes, because I always had them in my apron. She says, well, go and get it for me because I'm going to give it to someone. And if they call you, it might be the best thing that ever happened to you. I was gone before she was done talking. So I bring my business card back. Long story short, okay. She invites me to Thanksgiving with her family. She had these big Thanksgivings at her home in Winston-Salem. So she invites me to Thanksgiving that year. All I wanted to do was say hi and tell her how much I admired her. This was not in the plan. Okay, so I was able and fortunate to spend the final 13 Thanksgivings with her and her family. But the reason I share Maya Angelou with you as I talk about the second tool is this. I asked her about her writing process because she had such a photographic memory. And there was a book I was reading about her and Billie Holiday. It was called Heart of a Woman. And it was so graphic down to the curse words in that book. And so I really want to know how she approached her writing. And so she says to me, Miss Baffour, she never called me by my first name. She says, I would go to a room at the Brookstown Inn in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And because they knew her, they would give her a hotel room, take all the paintings, the flowers, everything of distraction out of the room, and they would leave her with a desk, a chair, a pad of yellow lined paper, and a glass of water and a pen. And she said, Ms. Baffour, I would sit in this room sometimes for 8 hours, uninterrupted, just writing, writing, writing nonstop. And at the end of those 8 hours, I would realize that out of everything I had written, all those papers in my room, I could only keep one sentence. And then she said to me, Ms. Baffour, easy reading is damn hard writing. And I didn't really appreciate that until I wrote my own book in 2019, right? Because if you think about it, ladies, when you enjoy someone's book, we often don't imagine the hardships they went through to make it an easy read for us, an enjoyable read. And the reason that this jumps out at me is because I think about the power of what I call, thank you, Jamie, enduring the draft. Right? When you think about building the kind of resilient mindset, ladies, that allows you to step into your true potential, the gifts, the opportunities that are meant for you in your life, you're going to have to endure the draft. So this means I want you to think about your life as a manuscript in motion. Okay. So this means each experience, especially the tough ones, each experience is another draft helping you sharpen your voice. You're all Toastmasters, right? It's helping you clarify your values, helping you refine your wisdom. If you think about it, ladies, no best-selling book ever starts with a final draft, right? If Maya Angelou knew that she would sometimes have to write for 8 hours just to keep one sentence, most of us probably wouldn't want to be writers. So the point with mindset is that when you embrace and understand that your life is a manuscript in motion and you're going to have these drafts that you endure the drafts, that in itself can help us feel resilient because we're not aiming for perfection. We're not trying to arrive somewhere, right? So when you expect perfection in the first draft, ladies, in the first draft of your career, the first draft of your relationship, the first draft of your leadership role, for instance, then what you're doing is setting yourself up for frustration, right? But when we allow ourselves revision, when we allow for revision, right? When we endure the drafts, we position ourselves to have the resilience that's needed for the transformations that are meant for us in our lives. And I want you to think about that really powerfully. Okay. So it's not also just important to have those drafts, enduring the drafts in that emotional backpack. It's also important to think about how do you handle the disruption, the uncertainty, the discomfort, the challenges you face in your life. Ladies, you do that by what I call minding your monologue. It is indisputable, right? It's an indisputable fact that we hear our voices more than anybody else's voice throughout our entire lifetimes. I think you'll agree with me. And if that is the case, right, those moments when you feel challenged or uncertain or uncomfortable or out of your comfort zone, what do you say to yourself in those moments? You might not often realize it, but that is the difference between how you power through a challenge and how you get rooted and stuck in it. You know, and I wanna share a quick story with you that sort of cements a point here, because now this image that you're seeing here, I know it's going to be hard for you to see what's happening in the very back of the room from the picture, but this was 2017. Okay, I'm at the World Bank doing a 90-minute presentation to 500 IT professionals who had convened from around the world. And I deliberately wait until I'm 75 minutes into my 90-minute presentation. And I pick on two women at the very, very back of the room. I know it's hard for you to see that from this vantage point, but they looked really comfortable. And guess what I did? I asked these two women to pack up their belongings and transplant themselves all the way from the back of the room to the front two empty seats. And that might be hard for some of you to see that, but there are two empty seats in the front. And I'm sure you're probably thinking, oh gosh, wow, that's a tough ask. Okay. So they drag themselves, they're walking towards the front of the room. And I noticed one of the women turned around and walked back to her seat. The other brave lady came all the way and sat in the front row. Now, unbeknownst to these two women, I had pasted two $100 gift cards underneath the two empty front seats. And that was simply a thank you, a reward for them being good sports. Now, ladies, I don't tell you that story to say that at the end of everything uncomfortable, disruptive, uncertain that you are asked to endure or asked to power through, I'm not saying that at the end of everything uncomfortable, there's going to be some financial reward waiting for you, right? But what I am saying is, how often are we having these catastrophizing conversations with ourselves about what is happening around us? That is why I call this your monologue. It's that one-way conversation that we're having. And the data shows us, and we're challenged and we're uncomfortable. The first thing that leaves us out of the windows and doors of our lives is our self-talk. And yet it's the one thing that we can indeed control. And I asked the lady, I said, the one who came and sat in the front, I said, tell us what was going through your head as you're walking from the front to the back to the front of the room. And she's like, well, do you really want to know? I was like, of course we want to know what you were thinking. And she says, well, I was thinking, I don't understand why Sylvia is making us do this. I mean, I was so comfortable where I was. I got to know my neighbors. Happy hour was in 15 minutes because it was right after my presentation. And yet look at what was waiting for her on the other side. And so it's important to think about this, ladies. It was two women, right, in the same room with the same invitation. One moved forward and the other turned back. Not because one was more capable than the other, right? But because of the conversation that she was having with herself in that moment. And that is the power, ladies, of our inner monologue. That's the power of stopping yourself sometimes and saying, am I minding my monologue? So when life is pulling you out of that comfort zone, right? The stories that you whisper to yourself about who you are, what you can handle, what is possible, it either will trap you where you are or advance you to where you deserve to be. And so I want you to stop yourself from time to time and just say, hey, am I minding my monologue? I do that myself because that is the one thing we can control in those moments of uncertainty and discomfort. That is how we harness a powerful mindset. And I want you to always remember a profound saying by Dr. Susan David. If you never heard this before, I hope you latch onto these words. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. When I heard those words, it made absolute sense to me, right? We're always going to be uncomfortable. And that is why we need a resilient mindset, because discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. If we want to have a wholesome, meaningful life, we're going to get uncomfortable at times. Now, the final tool that I want to invite you to think about putting into your emotional backpack has to do with the kinds of questions you ask yourselves. As you power through your days, ladies, you will have the opportunity to ask yourself questions constantly. Now, the challenge is to stay away from what I call barricading questions. When you're faced with uncertainty, discomfort, change, which is the nature of the beast of life, most of us, the data shows us that when we are uncomfortable, when we are challenged, when we are uncertain, we default to talking to ourselves with why questions, right? We frame immediately when things are uncomfortable, we start asking why. And don't get me wrong, why questions aren't always bad. There's certain realms of life where it's good to keep drilling down and asking why. But when you're trying to be resilient and have a powerful mindset to face the challenges in front of you, why questions are disempowering, they're unproductive, and they have you focusing on the uncontrollable. So what I want to invite you to consider, ladies, is developing a habit that's going to go in that emotional backpack. It's a habit of asking yourself more gateway questions. The reason I use the term gateway, unlike barricading, which close in your thinking, gateway questions help you open up the gates to forward thinking, right? And they typically begin with the word how or what. And they're self-empowering and they're forward thinking. And I want to give you a couple of examples. And then, Jamie, I will invite maybe a few people to throw in the chat and answer to, I'll show you an example with two barricading questions. And then the third one, I would love to hear some input from anyone who would like to take a stab at this. So let's just say the challenge of imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome is slithering into your world for some reason. The barricading question that might be seeping through your mind is, oh gosh, why don't I feel like I belong here, right? Okay, this is a question that maybe many of us as women have asked. I've been in rooms where I've second guessed whether I deserve to be there. This is not about perfection, right? It's about asking productive questions. So instead of defaulting to thinking, well, why don't I feel like I belong? It's much more empowering, much more forward thinking to think in this way. Hey, what past successes, right, are evidence that I'm qualified for this role? Because a lady who's walking into a new challenging situation thinking, what past successes qualify me for this role, they're thinking about wins in their lives versus the person who's in the corner thinking about why they don't feel like they belong. Barricading questions are very loaded, very difficult to answer. Many of us I know here, we grapple with pressures of perfection, right? We have this fear of making mistakes. So we don't try things. We don't challenge ourselves. Maybe you're the person who's thinking, why do mistakes feel like the end of the world to me sometimes? Okay. Now, ladies, remember, barricading questions are not wrong. They're not illegitimate. They are just unproductive when we're trying to build a powerful, resilient mindset. So instead of thinking, why do mistakes feel like the end of the world to me? I want to invite you to think in this way. Hey, how can I use this mistake to grow instead of letting it diminish me, letting it shrink me, right? If you think about it, the lady who's saying to herself, how can I let this mistake help me grow, is so much more empowered, right? And looking forward for solutions. Why didn't I get the job I deserved, the position I deserved? Is a loaded question. Instead, it's, hey, what one thing can I do differently to boost my skill set and marketability? If you're sitting in meetings and you're finding that no one ever kind of takes your advice seriously, thank you, Jamie. The question you might ask yourself might be, why don't people take my ideas seriously? I don't know why, ladies. That's a hard question to answer. It's much more empowering to think, what one thing can I do creatively to present my ideas for greater impact? Maybe it might require you going to talk to a friend who you know is really good at getting the ideas across in meetings, right? So I think you're kind of seeing the yin and yang. And I'd love to have someone help me find a gateway question for the final challenge that I'm sharing with you here. So imagine that you're somebody who struggles to set boundaries. I think that's something that especially seems to plague women more than men. Okay. So Jamie, what I'm going to do is share the barricading question, and then two or three who can chime in.
Okay.
And maybe if they want to unmute them, if you want to unmute yourself, I don't know if that's going to create problem, but I'll let you be the guy, Jamie. So this is the barricading question. Why do I feel so guilty when I say no? Right? I want to invite some reframe. If it's a what or how question, how could you speak to yourself differently about your struggle to set boundaries? Any brave volunteers? Okay, I see Jennifer has raised her hand. Hi,
Hi.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I thought of this a lot too. Why do I feel guilty? What am I, so a reframe question would be, what am I saying yes to by choosing to say no?
What am I saying yes to by choosing to say no? I love that. Thank you. Thank you. You read my mind. I think mine might be similar to yours. Do we have another volunteer who would like to reframe?
Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, because I'm not seeing everyone, so feel free if I don't see your
In
hand.
the chat, or raise your hand, or you can just shout it out.
Maybe the
No
barricading question is, why am I afraid to volunteer?
There's no wrong answers. I'm
Exactly.
guessing.
Yes, no wrong answers. Anyone?
This is a safe space.
Hi, this is Christine Hobbs. Can you repeat your question? I'm going
Yes,
to try answering it.
yes. Why do I feel so guilty when I say no? So the challenge is you're struggling to set boundaries and you keep defaulting to thinking, why do I feel guilty for saying no?
Yeah, one of the reasons is, oh, when I see people, I'll be paralyzed. I'll start stuttering. I might make a fool of myself. And I may not know the answer. Someone might make a fool out of me. And most of it is all about myself.
Okay, so if I was to challenge you to be empowered with your mindset by reframing what you're feeling with a question that begins with the word how or what, how could you, instead of thinking, why do I feel so guilty for saying no, how could you reframe that with a what or how question? Does that make
What can
sense?
yeah,
Yes.
you want me to answer that, right?
Yes, please.
What can I do or tell myself to build up my self-esteem that I can do anything that I need to do, that everything about me is good and I can do it? What can I do
Okay.
about it?
Right. And I would invite you to truncate the question as much as you can, because the short and sweet is good. It makes it much more believable for you, and memorable as well. But thank you for chiming in. So I see Linda and Victoria will do Linda, Victoria, and Sorel, and then I will wrap up. Okay.
Hi, thank you for this awesome session. I'm not looking my best, so I'm off camera right now.
No worries. No worries.
You. I think sometimes feeling like you're maybe being mean or you want people to like you. So you want to feel like you want people to like you. You just don't want to
Right.
feel like you're.
So what's the gateway question? How would you reframe the why do I feel so guilty when I say no? If I was to challenge you to ask it as a how or what question that is much more empowering, what could you say to yourself?
I think maybe not doing what's unnecessary to focus on, what you're supposed to be doing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to Victoria just so we can get another example, and then. But thank you for chiming in. This is something obviously we've got to develop a habit, right? It's not easy. You see how we struggle to reframe, right? Because we're so used to the why. Why is this? Why? So let's do Victoria, and then I will wrap up because I have a final story that I want to share with you. It's a bonus tool that I deliberately left off the four. So Victoria, go have at it.
Hello, everyone. Am I starting with the barricading question first?
No, just the gateway. The barricading is why do I feel so guilty when I say no? What's your gateway?
Just make sure that
It starts with how or what, just to guide you. How
how.
or what? Yes.
Just stay confident within yourself.
Okay, then the question might be, how can I be more confident within myself, right? You want to frame it as a question. Yep. Thank you so much.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. So this is what I'd said,
Thank you.
what would honoring, right? Let me just what would honoring my needs allow me to show up for more fully, right? That could be another one. Instead of just saying, why do I feel so guilty for saying no? Now you say to yourself, what would honoring my needs allow me to show up for more fully in my life, right? So that's so thank you all those of you that chimed in. I just want to wrap up. I have I was a Toastmaster, so I understand the importance of timing. So let's this is the summary. As I mentioned, I'll have the slides for you. So all of this it'll be a PDF version to share with you, to remind you of those four strategies. I did promise you that I had a surprise strategy for that tool, that emotional backpack. It is your perspective, right? The fifth tool is your ability to pan out your perspective. So powerful. As you move through the rest of your life, this is going to mean more to you than you will ever imagine. And I want to close out with a 2-minute story that touched me deeply, and it speaks to the power of perspective. So if you'll indulge me for 2 more minutes here, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so maybe I can be more front and center there. Okay. So a 92-year-old, petite, well-poised, proud lady who's fully dressed each morning by 8 o'clock. She's 92 years old, ladies, with her hair fashionably combed aside and her makeup perfectly applied, even though she is legally blind. She moved into a nursing home today because her husband of 70 years recently passed away, making the move necessary. Now, after waiting patiently for many hours in the lobby of this nursing home, she smiles sweetly when she's told that her room is finally ready. So as she maneuvers her walker towards the elevator, she has a young helper, and he gives her a visual description of her tiny, tiny room, including the old gray sheets that hung over her windows as curtains. I love it, she said, with the enthusiasm of a 7-year-old having just been presented with a new puppy. And this kid says, "Wait, Mrs. Jones, just wait. You haven't even seen your room yet." That has nothing to do with it, she says, because happiness is something you decide on ahead of time. Whether I like my room or not does not depend on how the furniture is arranged. It is how I arrange my mind. And she said, you see, son, when you change the way you look at things, even if you are legally blind, the things that you look at begin to change. I mean, a woman with no sight, but so much perspective, right, ladies? And guess what? Perspective is power. Because that 92-year-old woman didn't change her circumstances to change the way she saw them. And for every single one of you on this call, myself included, that is the opportunity we have. Because no matter what challenges or struggles or uncertainties come your way, your perspective is always within your control. That can change everything. Ladies, she is right. Happiness is something you get to decide on ahead of time. But you know what else is? So is your worth. So is your voice. And so is the way you choose to show up, take up space, and own your impact. Thank you so much for giving me your listening ear. It's been a treat and a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.